Colin, you're going to love this one because you're going next. It's the Packers. Um, Aaron Rodgers. Oh no, we can't speak about Aaron Rodgers anymore. He is no longer a Packers quarterback, and we don't have to discuss the saga anymore. Which the saga is now handed over to Jordan Love in a sense. And I was looking at some of the players in which he's going to have at his disposal this year, and it's a really younger offense. In particular the wide receivers. Watson had a difficult start to the season. I wonder if Watson's career initially in the first season there would have been a lot better if he had made that catch in week 1 in which he dropped and Aaron Rodgers gave him that stare, because at the end of the season, when he got it right, he was a really explosive player. And they have Dobbs, who came on last year, and then this year they've drafted Reed in the second round, another wide receiver who's expected to start immediately. And they still got Aaron Jones in the backfield and an offensive line that is reasonably secure. So is it all bad? Like, people have little expectation right now for the Packers. Where do you see the Packers right now? Again, in the draft, they did what they always do, which is the Packers fans are chomping at the bit for an explosive player on offense. They don't go near an offensive player in the first round and continue the trend of a defensive player. Is it the defense that's going to put them in a position to win games next season, or is Jordan Love ready to make this big step up?
Well, whether Jordan Love is ready or not, the atmosphere in Green Bay and around Lambeau is going to be infinitely better. You said we can move on from our round, so we can't, because Matt Steidman, who we've had on the show a number of times, at the day of that we're recording this, had a major story in The Athletic, and people should definitely check it out, where he talked to Rodgers. And my goodness, the divorce was a long time coming, which we all knew. I mean, we've talked about that on this show before, Brian. I think if the Packers had their time again, they would absolutely bite the Broncos' hands off for those 3 first-round picks. But when you hear about it and how unhappy things seem to be over the past couple of years, and kind of the pettiness and everything that went on, and don't get me wrong, it seemed Rodgers, there was an awful lot of pettiness on his side, but it feels like the team could have handled it. And Andrew Brandt was kind of tweeting today about how it demonstrates that the teams hold the power in the NFL, which is true. But ultimately, if you have a player who's fundamentally unhappy, what is the point in keeping that player around? What was gained by the Packers by keeping Aaron Rodgers around last year? So I think it will be very, very, very interesting to see. He looks like a new person in the Jets, and when we do our AFC, off-season review, we can talk about that. But to me, the atmosphere is ultimately going to be infinitely better, and I think the fact that they won't have that question to deal with. Is Jordan Love ready? I don't know. We've barely seen him. We've seen him a couple of times. And to be honest, that game against the Chiefs, the story became more about the fact that they sat his mom and his sister somewhere, that basically they would have had a better view from if they'd used the Hubble telescope. It was crazy. But we will see. I think that for the Packers, they are a football institution. I think they will be delighted that the focus is now going to be back on the team and performing as a team, rather than their superstar back-to-back unhappy QB. It'll ultimately be Jordan Love who decides how far this team can go, because you can only scheme around a limited QB to a certain degree, even if your head coach is offensively minded and seems to be very smart. I don't know. Nobody knows what we're in for.
Connor, you touched on the NFC West episode around the job that's ahead of Sean McVay. I mean, is this where Matt LaFleur has to kind of earn his money in terms of taking Jordan under his wing and kind of, trying to take away the noise and the expectations and what will come with him being the starting quarterback this season for the Packers?
I think that's a really good point, Brian. I think that's exactly it, right? This is where Matt LaFleur earns his stripes. Not that he hasn't earned them already, but people will say it's easy to do it when you've Aaron Rodgers to deliver on the field. You made the point about Watson's shaky start to last season, and I couldn't help thinking as you were saying it, maybe his transition would have been a little bit easier if Rodgers had bothered to attend the OTAs, which obviously he's happy to do now that he's a Jet and all is well with the world. All of that said, now I have to say, can't believe these words are coming out of my mouth. I do actually sympathise with Rodgers' decision ultimately because of the lack of help that he got. I mean, the one time they decide to draft an offensive player in the first round and they draft Aaron Rodgers' replacement. Although Brian Goodcuss would probably tell you that got 2 seasons of MVP level play out of Aaron Rodgers, so it wasn't a completely wasted pick. Whatever way it turns out from here, it probably delivered a huge amount of value there. What did the Packers gain from keeping Rodgers on the roster last year? Probably only the solace in knowing that he wasn't going to win a Super Bowl somewhere else. So nobody will be rooting against him to a greater degree than Brian Gutekunst, hoping that he doesn't do it in New York. And whatever way that the Jordan Love season goes, that'll be the spectre that's hanging over them if he does start to cut a swathe through the AFC East and they start looking like likely contenders over in East Rutherford, New Jersey there. But sorry, specifically on what the Packers are going to do this season as opposed to what they could have done or where they would have been otherwise. Yeah, we haven't seen enough of Love to know. They look like they've got an exciting, core of young receivers there that could do something. LaFleur, as we know, can scheme anyone open. Like it's amazing sometimes what he can do with that offense. They've got the best one of the best offensive lines in the league, arguably. So it's not the worst situation for Love to be in. All things up, coach who very much the quarterback whisperer in the Kyle Shanahan mode. Good O-line, good protection in front of you. I don't think the wide receiver group necessarily bears comparison with the really elite units that are in the league, but it's absolutely serviceable. And this isn't the hardest division either. A lot will depend on what happens around you, whether the Vikings can sustain what they did last year. Spoiler alert, I don't think they can. Not so sure the Bears, as we've been saying, are going to be ultra competitive this year. Lions are the bookies' favourites to win the division. Lions and bookies' favourite isn't 3 words you've heard in a sentence for a long, long time. It's not insurmountable if he hits his straps early on, Love, and if that whole sitting him for 3 years and having him learn at the feet of the master, and jury's out on how good of a mentor Aaron Rodgers will necessarily have been. All QBs at that level are selfish and want to prolong their own careers to the greatest degree possible. They're not going to help their replacement through the door or let the ladder down for him. But in flashes that we've seen, small and short, although they've been, he certainly doesn't look out of his depth. He looks poised. He can make the throws and he can make things happen. Let's see when we get a bigger sample size this year whether he can actually do it. But I'm not so sure I'd be too down on them, I have to say, which is big coming from me as a Bears fan, right?
Colin, last question on the Packers, and it's from a fan's perspective. What do you believe the expectations will be from the Packers fan group going into the season, bearing in mind how successful they've been in winning divisions, getting the championship games? And we've still, with all due respect, they've had some difficult losses over the years where they probably should have gone to the playoffs. Sorry, should have gone to the Super Bowl. And the Bucs game where, in particular, during COVID, where they lost that one and they were heavy favourites going into that game. Are we, because of the division, because of the nature of what the Vikings were like last year, and people still feel they're going to be a drop-off, the Lions are going to challenge, we're not sure where the Bears are at. Should the Packers fans be thinking there's still an opportunity to win the division with the players we have around us?
I mean, I suppose it has 2 sides to this. I think Packers fans in general will think that, and I think as fans you can understand why they would think that, right? Because given the history, the pedigree, and a lot of that, I suppose, is mystique in some ways, right? Because ultimately, it's very early on. They have success. They have a number of years in the wilderness, and then Reggie rolls into town. And we've had the good fortune, Brian, to talk to Wade Phillips, and Wade basically, who's had the greats. I mean, look at who Wade has coached, and he basically told us that Reggie was the guy. He just couldn't believe the things Reggie was able to do on the field. And Reggie, funnily enough, is probably the guy who changed the trajectory. We always talk about the Packers and quarterbacks, and he's probably the one who changed and got them back on track, bringing him in. And ever since then, they've been there or thereabouts because of the QBs. I think they will have that expectation. It'll be a little bit like, Manchester United fans in the post-Ferguson era. It doesn't matter who is or who isn't there or who isn't in charge. The expectation, whether it's real or not, but I think they will look around the division, and it's not like there's anyone towering over it. We'll get into the other teams, but there's nobody that you say, this is not Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes lording it over the